What you are about to hear is a 100% true story. In March 1942, the German army thought they had stopped a pathetic British suicide mission. A broken-down warship had crashed into their most heavily guarded dock. Hundreds of Nazi officers boarded it and taking photos. They were completely unaware that hidden, deep inside the ship's steel walls, a chemical fuse was silently eating away at a wire. Minutes later, 4 tons of hidden explosives detonated. This is the story of the deadliest Trojan horse in modern military history. To understand this absolute madness, we must go back to the darkest days of World War II. Britain was facing starvation. Hitler possessed a terrifying naval beast, the battleship Tirpitz, the largest and most heavily armed ship in Europe. If this massive monster entered the Atlantic Ocean, it would completely obliterate British supply lines. But the British discovered one fatal weakness. The Tirpitz was so massive, it required a colossal dry dock for repairs. There was only one dock on the entire Atlantic coast big enough to hold it, the Normandy dock in Saint-Nazaire, France. If the British could destroy this dock, the Tirpitz would never risk leaving Germany. But Saint-Nazaire was an impenetrable fortress, guarded by 5,000 elite troops and massive anti-aircraft cannons. Bombing it from the air was impossible. The dock gates were made of solid steel, 30 feet thick. The British needed a miracle. They proposed a plan so suicidal, many thought the commanders had lost their minds. Operation Chariot. The plan: take an obsolete, disposable ship, pack it with explosives, and ram it straight into the gates. They selected the HMS Campbelltown, an old American destroyer that was practically scrap metal. To survive the approach, engineers cosmetically modified the ship, cutting its smokestacks to look exactly like a German torpedo boat. But the real weapon was hidden deep inside the ship's bow, in a secret, pitch-black compartment. They carefully packed 24 devastating depth charges, weighing over 4 tons, tightly together. To ensure the Germans couldn't defuse them, even if found, they poured massive blocks of solid concrete entirely over the bombs. Finally, they attached custom-made acid timers designed to silently eat through a wire and detonate 8 hours after the crash. The ship was now a colossal, floating time bomb. There was absolutely no turning back. A force of 600 highly trained commandos boarded the suicide ship and a small fleet of wooden boats. On the night of March 27, 1942, the explosive Trojan horse began its journey into the jaws of hell. They sailed quietly up the heavily mined Loire River under the cover of pitch-black darkness. They even raised the Nazi naval flag to complete the illusion, sailing straight toward the enemy fortress. At 1:22 a.m., the absolute worst happened. Blinding German searchlights snapped on. They were spotted. The coastal batteries aimed hundreds of massive cannons at them, demanding a secret identification code. Using a stolen code book, a British officer flashed fake signals back in fluent German. "Friendly ship under attack." The brilliant bluff worked. The German guns stayed silent, buying the British 5 agonizingly crucial minutes. But as the ship got dangerously close, the disguise was finally pierced. The enemy realized it was a trap. Instantly, the night sky erupted into an absolute hell of tracer fire and artillery. The sirens wailed.
The British tore down the fake flag, hoisted the Royal Navy colors, and the captain pushed the engines to the maximum. Blinded by searchlights and tearing through a storm of exploding metal, the massive beast charged the gates. At exactly 1:34 a.m., the 1,000-ton floating bomb smashed head-on into the solid steel dock doors. The impact was so violently powerful, the ship sliced 33 feet deep into the metal structure and got perfectly wedged. The Trojan horse was parked. Instantly, British commandos swarmed off the blazing ship into the darkness. Fierce hand-to-hand combat erupted. Their mission was to destroy the massive pumping stations around the dock by hand. They succeeded in blowing up the heavy machinery, ensuring the dry dock would be totally ruined.
But the extraction plan failed. Their small wooden escape boats were annihilated by German artillery. Trapped behind enemy lines, the surviving commandos fought street to street until they completely ran out of ammunition. By dawn, the raid was over. Hundreds of brave British soldiers were either dead or captured. The German commanders surveyed the destruction and laughed at the British for a failed mission. They thought the British had foolishly sacrificed their men just to dent a massive steel gate with an empty ship. By 10 a.m., over 400 top-ranking German officers and soldiers gathered around the stuck Campbelltown. Dozens boarded the ship, walking around like tourists, taking photos and mocking the dead. They had absolutely no idea they were standing directly on top of 4 tons of primed explosives encased in concrete. Deep inside the pitch-black belly of the ship, the corrosive acid had been silently eating away the final copper wire for hours. The captured British commandos waited in their prison cells, staring at their watches in agonizing silence. At exactly 10:35 a.m., the timer reached 0. The greatest Trojan horse in history awoke with the terrifying force of an earthquake. The colossal explosion instantly vaporized the front of the ship, wiping out all 400 German soldiers on board. The massive 30-foot thick steel gates were blown completely off their hinges into the air. Millions of gallons of dark ocean water violently rushed in, completely destroying the entire dock facility. The mission was a flawless success. Hitler's terrifying Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic Ocean. The brave men of Operation Chariot earned 89 military decorations, forever known as the greatest raid of all, proving that sometimes the most destructive weapon in a war is a broken ship you thought was empty.
Velmora. Discover the unbelievable.